had a request. A lady back here from Lewiston would like for you, if you have had a sighting of Bigfoot, to raise your hand. Okay, a few. And not as many as I would have expected, but anyway, that gives you some idea. And okay, Dr. Meldrum.
Okay. Rich, well, I already called me calling someone else.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm wondering about, a lot of us have been talking now, as these fields have progressed in our knowledge base, why the television shows still separate issues, and maybe it's to keep it specialized, but they have
make sure
Bigfoot shows.
I did, so we know how to get in touch with you. I did, but
Which was fake.
Your age.
That's right.
Big-
I was driving, the driver, I went down and did an interview on Fox.
card.
a couple
Yeah.
days
Oh,
ago,
wonderful, thank
And he was telling me about this really fascinating program, and I listened to him. I said, well, you know that was all just put on. No, really? Really? I said, yeah, it was just a spoof, a mockumentary, or whatever you call it. But anyway, so why did they
Well, I'm
separate the
asking for how
phenomenon?
come there hasn't been more of an integration of all these
Cryptids?
creatures
Yeah.
into the general discussion, because I see Bigfoot people over here and Loch Ness monsters over here, and there's no overlap, it seems. It's
Well,
kept separate.
Yeah, I'm sure that there are many different reasons in my own, and I would advocate to keep them kind of separate, because it's always a challenge. My biggest challenge has been to shift the perception of Bigfoot away from the tabloid into the arena of a legitimate biological question of a living primate. And even my book was carried by Barnes and Noble. And if you go into a Barnes and Noble, chances are you won't find it on the nature shelf. You'll find it in the new age, new knowledge section. And I took exception to this with one of the managers, and I said, it's supposed to be right there next to Jane Goodall's book. It's kind of classed as natural history. I said, not new age, not between Bermuda Triangle and crop circles. And she says, oh, but you'll get 10 times the traffic in the new age section. I said, that's not the point. I mean, selling books is not the primary goal. Educating people and changing that perception from it being a cult or a paranormal phenomenon. People ask me if I'm a cryptozoologist, and I say, no, I'm not. I mean, I'm interested in the possibility of unrecognized species, but first and foremost, I'm an anthropologist who's interested in the possibility of a relic hominoid, or hominoids, as you suggested, multiple species. And so I find some strategic advantage keeping them separate. It's when they gloss over the whole thing, it's much easier and treat them each superficially, it's much easier for the skeptics to be very dismissive. And it's like, for example, there's a little booklet that just came out, Search for Man-Beasts, by one of these career skeptics. And this is supposed to be this great expose, this great scientific treatment of the subject, if you read the reviews of his book. And his chapter on Bigfoot is ridiculously superficial. Well, this is not me patting myself on the back, but knowing what you know about my career, my interest in my contribution to this field, how could anyone write a serious contribution on Bigfoot and never have talked to me, at least a phone call? And so, in one of his paragraphs, he did this analysis, the scientific analysis or objective analysis of Bigfoot encounters by referring to Janet and Colin Board's book, the Bigfoot Case book. Well, those two people are, they're career authors on the paranormal. In fact, Alien Animals, their previous book, the cover art has all these things from Bigfoot to dogmen to chupacabras, and all of them depicted with glowing red eyes, which is kind of the trademark of a paranormal phenomenon. They're not biologists. They're not critical. Their book is a wastebasket of every imaginable story that's been told about Bigfoot, and the conclusion this author drew from having read that was Bigfoot encounters are completely unreliable. It's this hodgepodge, this mismatch of everything from quadrupedal to bipedal, fangs, no fang, claws, glowing eyes, this color, that color, disappearing into orbs of light. Well, yeah, if you relied on that as your only source of information, but did he refer to John Green's The Sasquatch Files, or books like by Ivan Sanderson or John Napier or Chris Murphy, or any other people that have done much more serious objective treatment? So keeping it separate for me is better, in my opinion, quite honestly. So the quality of evidence sometimes is different. I'm not one to, those who live in glass houses don't throw stones. I don't criticize other aspects, but and especially when it comes to the paranormal, this is one. And even within the Bigfoot community, you may already realize that, or perceive that there's this tendency to split into two camps. Those who, well, even probably three camps: human, ape, and then paranormal. That they came out of UFOs, or that they are interdimensional time travelers. And, I mean, this one gentleman came up to me after one conference. He was very absolutely serious and sincere, and he had an experience where he claimed that he saw it, and then it just turned and disappeared into another dimension. And so he said, "This is why you don't find bodies. This is why you can't catch them. He says, they can just shift it to another dimension." He was absolutely convinced, absolutely serious, perfectly straight face. And how do I judge that? There's no way for me to objectively evaluate his experience. And so it remains a subjective and therefore unscientific piece of data. And my perspective on this subject comes from a student of human evolution, particularly an anatomist interested in adaptations for the evolution of bipedalism in the hominid lineage. And so the prospect of another hominid biped was one that was really intriguing to me. That being one motivation, setting aside all the other interesting aspects of mystery and intrigue of an unsolved search for a new animal. All that goes with that. So that's where my attention has been focused. So it's, sometimes I'm criticized for not accommodating those other points of view, and it's just that in my position, justifying the search for the objective search for a flesh and blood primate is hard enough, is an uphill struggle enough, let alone weighing it down with all the other aspects, all the other implications of suggesting paranormal abilities or qualities. So.
Thank you.
I've heard many theories as to why a body has not been found, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, sort of two-pronged approach.
We couldn't hear the question.
Oh, the question was, he's heard many theories as to why a body has not been found. What are my thoughts on that? Two-pronged approach. One deals with the natural history, the inferred natural history of the species itself. You have a large body, solitary, presumably long-lived. I was pointing out that there are examples documented by the footprint finds of adults spanning 10, 20 years. We've got footprints that are recognizably that individual over and over. If we can extrapolate from other large apes, and recognizing that longevity tends to increase be positively correlated with body size, then a giant primate is probably going to live at least a half century, 50, even maybe 60, 70 years. It's at the top of its food chain. There's no natural predators. So a death is going to be a very rare event. There's not a lot of turnover in these creatures. And they're very rare. This is another thing. Cliff Barrett and I one day had an interesting conversation about this, but let's take a short aside there for a moment. How many do I think there are out there? The way I approach that question when it's posed is, okay, We have some data from which we can infer some things. We have a footprint record that suggests, solitary individuals, and we have suggesting other evidence in distribution of accounts and so forth that people have looked at, some people who do analysis of that kind of data, suggesting that they have a home range of perhaps 1,000 square miles, depending on the nature of the terrain, the habitat. And then there's obviously going to be a lot of range of variation if you look at other large mammals like bear and so forth, depending on whether it's a male, whether it's female, female with offspring, or whatever. The ranging patterns are going to vary. But say 1,000 square miles. The fact that they're solitary suggests then that probably males have a home range. Maybe something like orangutans, where the males defend a home territory. And they use that loud call to broadcast their presence and to keep other males away. Their range then just happens to overlap that of several females who are also relatively solitary with young in tow. And then they interact with those females as the females are receptive. So if that model holds for Sasquatch, then you've got 1,000 square miles, a dominant male, maybe one or two, maybe three females whose range is slightly overlapping, maybe overlapping more than one male, and offspring. If you look, for example, at the state of Idaho, and I couldn't do this for Michigan right now off the top of my head, but if you look at Idaho, a map, and look at the rainfall, because these things probably require habitat that has 16 to 18 inches of rainfall or more per annum to sustain the type of forest and understory productivity necessary for a large forest. And you plot out in that potential area 1,000 square mile plats. You come up with about 5 or 6. So, 10 or 12. 10 or 12 with maybe 5 individuals per plot of ground. So in all of the state of Idaho, there's maybe 50 or 60 Sasquatch. And yet tens of thousands of black bear, for example, hundreds of thousands of deer. And yet when you go out hiking in the woods, how many skeletons of bear do you find laying around? Grover Krantz used to always ask groups like this, how many in all your traipses around have you ever found a recognizable bear skeleton? How many do you have in all your hiking? And in 20 years of asking that, he never had anyone. I don't do it routinely like he did, but I had one individual, and it was a skull, just a skull, isolated. So he didn't know whether it was a bear that had been hit by a car, or shot by a hunter and uncollected, or whatever. So, given the rarity, a death is going to be a rare event. It's going to be, and the fact that the top of their food chain is going to be a natural event. And as you know, if you've ever had a pet, for example, that got sick or died, like we had a cat one time that got in a fight with the neighbor's cat, and he got the worst of it. And he had a gaping wound on his back, but before we could get him taken care of, he disappeared. We couldn't find him. And I thought, oh, he's gone off somewhere to lick his wounds or to die. And 5 days went by, not a sign of it. And then all of a sudden he emerged from under the bed in the master bedroom, where he'd been holed up at the head, under the headboard, right in the shadows. We couldn't see him, back behind one of the pull-out drawers, and was just licking his wounds. And if he died, we would have found him eventually. But in nature, when an animal does that and hides itself off, then they die. Then all the decomposers and scavengers. Calcium is at a premium, especially in the northern Rockies. And there are lots of animals, porcupines and pack rats and mice, with squirrels that chew up bone to recycle the calcium very, very readily. When you're in wet coniferous forests, and especially the added factor of volcanic soils like in the Cascades and much of the Rocky Mountains and northern Rockies, granitic soils as well, basaltic soils, the pH is very acidic. So what bones aren't chewed up by scavengers, if they're exposed to the elements, they dissolve away really quickly. They deteriorate very rapidly. And so the place we would look for bones would be caves, limestone caves, where the alkaline environment of the cave would be conducive to fossilization, to preservation of the bone. I visited with a paleontologist specializes in the excavation of Pleistocene sediments in southeast Alaska. And he goes into limestone caves. And he says, the only thing we find are animals that live in the caves or that are dragged in by predators or scavengers sometimes. So take, for example, Gigantopithecus. Here, given the span of fossils we have, we know that animal, that species, Gigantopithecus blacki, lived in Eastern Asia for a 1.5 million years. And yet for that entire tenure, we have two jaw fragments, where the thinner parts of the radius of the jaw are completely chewed away. Just the thick bodies and the thick enameled crowns of the teeth have been preserved. Two jaws and about 1,000 isolated teeth. When you realize there's 32 teeth in the jaw of an individual, then that's not very many individuals. And we only have those because porcupines dragged them into the caves. They obviously weren't occupying the caves. So, and all the remains show the gnawing patterns of by porcupines. So if you didn't have limestone caves and you didn't have porcupines to concentrate them in those caves, we'd have no fossil record of Gigantopithecus at all. So the fact that we don't have any fossils of Bigfoot in North America doesn't surprise me. They may have only been over here for a couple 100,000 years ago. And likewise, the physical remains, it's not that surprising. I keep hoping, I have repeatedly had instances where people have called me up about an interesting bone they found. The one that was really promising, the gentleman assured me that he had taken a human osteology class when he was an anthropology student. He stopped after his bachelor's didn't go on, but he worked for a power company, and they were putting in a power line across through the Rogue River country, southern Oregon, really right back country. And one of his coworkers came in with a skull. He said, "This could be it." So I was excited, and I said, "Well, I snapped some pictures." He said, "It was a moose skull with the snout broken." I said, "You must have been asleep in your lab, in your human osteology lab." I said, "Just look at the teeth. If you've seen artiodactyl hoofed animal teeth, they're like shuffled leaves of dentin and enamel. So you get this rasping effect because they browse and chew up plants, and nothing like the rounded unidot molars of a large primate." So time and time again, there have been examples where I was only to be disappointed by it. And if it's not a skull of a common animal, it's a rock. This guy had this rock, and it was uncanny. It was an amazing artifact. But it wasn't an artifact. It was just a natural formation. But this rock had sockets, orbits. It had a brow ridge. It looked like this, and it even had some inclusions in the rock matrix that looked like broken off teeth. It was just uncanny, but there was no question. It was just a natural. There were no sutures. And there was no symmetry between the two. It just was not. It was not bone. It was a rock. Someone sent me a rock that they were absolutely convinced was a petrified foot, and it was this very fine sandstone that was fluted by the flow of water, and it had these remarkably shaped toes. And then it had these inclusions, little barbs of a real rich chocolatey sediment that he said were the little short long bones in the instep of the foot. And so he sent it to actually, maybe it was Robert Morgan who was involved with that one, but sent it to me, and I said, "Hey, this is a rock. If you want it back, then send me the $30 for the return postage, because I'm not going to mail it to you." Unless you do, he did it. But anyway. So that's why I think, someday, I hope someone, we had one that was interesting, from Oklahoma, I think it was, this woman, they were digging out their septic tank or something in the yard, and she came up with a tooth, and it was a very broad, spatulate, shuttle-shaped incisor. It was huge. Well, as soon as I saw it, I thought, maybe, and I looked at it real closely, it was a camel. If you've ever seen camel teeth, they have these really flaring, broad, shuttle-shaped incisors. And during the Pleistocene, there was on North America, there was a giant camelops we have the